It's Tuesday, the 18th of October. This is Politics Live. Joining me today, soon, hopefully, Conservative MP Steve Brine, Shadow Culture Minister Alex Davies-Jones, Guardian columnist Gaby Hinsliff and the Associate Editor of the Telegraph, Camilla Tominey. Today.
How long can Liz Truss survive?
Ministers arrive for Cabinet. She's Prime Minister for now, but is Liz Truss really still in charge?
To rip the plaster off and say we got this wrong and I'm sorry is leadership in its own right.
But Labour's not accepting the Prime Minister's apology.
An arsonist is still an arsonist, even when they turn up with a bucket of water and run back into the burning building.
Trussonomics is dead. Long live Hunt-Truss.
That means decisions of eye-watering difficulty.
But not everyone is inspired.
What is our vision? Does he accept we can't just slide into a sort of second-rate economy?
And was this a helpful thing to say about your boss?
The Prime Minister is not under a desk, as the
It was a torrid day for Prime Minister Liz Truss yesterday, and then she did an interview with the BBC's political editor, Chris Mason. Let's have a listen.
The Conservatives into the next general election?
I will lead the Conservatives into the next general election.
Definitely.
Well, look, yeah. I'm not focused on internal debates within the Conservative Party.
But you need to be, don't you? You need to be in order to stay in office.
The important thing is that I've been elected to this position to deliver for the country. We are facing very tough times. We simply cannot afford to spend our time talking about the Conservative Party rather than what we need to deliver. And that is my message to my colleagues.
Truss talking to Chris Mason yesterday. Steve Brine, welcome to you, who's arrived in the studio. How long has Liz Truss got?
Straight in there.
Yes.
I like the way you...
Why hang around? Yeah.
As long as Conservative MPs give her, as long as Conservative MPs give any leader, is how long they've got. I think I said on the BBC this morning, politics is a results business, and not unlike football. And at the end of the day, if the Prime Minister and her new Chancellor, who, as you know, is a very close friend of mine, who I think is a superb appointment, if they produce something good on the 31st, as in the new financial statement, I don't know what we're calling it, then, and things look better, then I think that her position will be much firmer than it is today. I mean, look, she isn't going to look at today's front page that you've got laid out on your desk here and skip to work this morning. Let's put it that way. And we'll have a look at those front pages in just a moment. Just briefly on your results business analogy in terms of politics. So are you saying that if the markets don't improve dramatically and stay in a sustained position, if more Conservative MPs come out publicly, as a number of them have already, and say it's time for her to go, and if the polls don't improve, giving Labour something like 30 points ahead of you, then will she go? So it's a fair question. What does results look like? Because it's not in football. It's 3 points. What does results look like in our business? I would suggest that it looks like a steadying of the ship. That has happened, part one, with Jeremy's appointment. Now we're in a holding pattern to see what happens on Halloween. I'm not sure whose idea it was to do it on Halloween, but anyway, it writes its headlines. But now we're in a holding pattern to see what that looks like. If that stabilises the ship in terms of the markets, then I think Conservative MPs will breathe a little. But right now, yeah, everybody is worried. Not everybody is obsessing about the personality of who is the Prime Minister or the Chancellor. But everybody is concerned about the polls, and any politician who comes on and tells you they're not is not telling you the truth.
Alex, how long has Liz Truss got?
Well, I'm not looking at the polls. I'm looking at constituents who are in my emails who are telling me that they can't afford to pay their bills. They're worried about their mortgage payments. They're worried about their pensions crashing. And we can't keep playing this game. It's not a game. This is having real life consequences here. And we desperately need a change. Liz Truss stood on a platform on a mandate and was elected by Conservative members. That mandate has been trashed now. Truss economics has been a proven car crash. The economy needs stabilising. And what we desperately need is change at the heart of government.
Right, but does that mean you want her gone today, next week, October the 31st, and you want a general election?
I'm a Labour MP. I'm always going to want a Labour government to make things better for the people of this country. I think it's ultimately Steve and his colleagues' decision on when the Prime Minister goes, and I think the public also need a say in that desperately.
How long do you think she's got, Gaby?
I think the question is what she's achieving by staying there now, because it already feels as if Jeremy Hunt is essentially Prime Minister in all but name. He's taking all the decisions. Her entire platform has disappeared from underneath her. She looked, you know, as the Sun said, someone like a ghost in the Commons yesterday. It doesn't look like a happy experience. And at the moment, she seems to be saying primarily to guarantee what, the saying is confidence and stability, isn't it? It's a more stable operation when you know who the Prime Minister is, even if she's deeply underwhelming, than if you have a leadership contest that throws everyone up in the air. I'm just not sure if that's enough reason to occupy number 10.
How long do you think?
Well, there couldn't be another leadership context like before if it happens, so it's going to be a kind of Michael Howard-esque tap on the shoulder by Sir Graham Brady.
What, a coronation of somebody?
Well, if that happens, then that's going to be rejected, I think, by the public, who will probably rightly say we need a general election. However, who's the only candidate that they could bring back in that wouldn't demand a general election? That's the bring back Boris argument, who could turn around to the country and say, well, actually, you did elect me and I did have an 80-seat majority. I think it's been reduced to 71, but no matter. So they're stuck between a rock and a hard place, aren't they, the Conservative Party?
Well, on that note, just to say you can see the whole interview with Chris Mason and Liz Truss, the Prime Minister, on BBC iPlayer, as we are showing you now. Let's take a look at a couple of the front pages that were mentioned by our guests. Let's start with the Metro. The Axeman cometh, doesn't sound very comfortable, followed by the front page of the Telegraph. The Daily Telegraph, we must take decisions of eye-watering difficulty. That was Jeremy Hunt yesterday when he addressed the Commons. Are we entering a new age of austerity, Steve Brine?
Not in the sense that, Jeremy said yesterday in the Commons, when, I used to be his PPS, I was one of his health ministers. When he was Culture Secretary, he faced, I think, cuts of 25 to 30% in his department in the 2010 austerity when we were picking up from the last Labour government. So, he actually said in terms, and you can read it in Hansard, that he doesn't think that we are looking at that. But there is no question that there are difficult decisions to be taken on tax, taken them. There are difficult decisions to be taken on spending. You'll hear that on the 31st. And I think it is perfectly legitimate to say to Rachel Reeves, the Shadow Chancellor, well, where are you on this? Because just saying, we want a general election, just saying, it's a mess, I mean, that there does not make a government. I like Alex, am primarily concerned about my constituents. I asked Jeremy Hunt about mortgage rates in the House yesterday and whether he thinks that a big rise in them are inevitable. And he talked about the conversations he's having with the governor to ask him what he needs to not make that happen, because that is what is literally frightening my constituents right now.
And Alex, just to respond to that, you agree, you wouldn't have started from this place, but if you inherited it, you would have to make very similar, if not the same, decisions, certainly on spending.
They would.
No, this government have had 12 years,
no,
Joe. 12 years, and now we're going back to austerity, back to public spending cuts, because the Prime Minister has crushed the economy in dramatic fashion. Let's be clear about that. That's why we're in this mess now. We haven't even seen an OBR forecast. There's been no transparency in what's coming, and now they're on their 4th Chancellor this year. It's disgraceful and the public deserve better.
Well, let's talk to Mohammed El-Erian, economist and former Deputy Director of the International Monetary Fund. Welcome to you. I don't know if you heard that last comment there from our guest, Alex, saying that Liz Truss has crashed the economy. Do you agree?
So what she has done, unfortunately, is she has priced in a risk premium, a political risk premium that did not exist in the British markets beforehand. So as a result, it is very difficult to reset to where we were on September 22nd. And as a result, the average Brit is going to face higher mortgage rates and the average company is going to face higher borrowing costs, which both deprive growth.
Right. So you are saying that any tax rises or spending cuts that the UK is facing will be bigger and deeper as a result of the mini-budget 3 weeks ago?
Unfortunately, that's the reality. You cannot simply reset the system without paying something for the major uncertainty you created about policy continuity.
Right. So the government is going to have to do an awful lot more than it might have had to do in order to restore market confidence, because markets now don't see us as creditworthy as they did before.
That's correct. And in addition to that, we will be much more vulnerable to a global environment that is deteriorating and market conditions that are becoming more difficult.
When the former deputy governor of the Bank of England, Charlie Bean, said that actually the UK's financial status is more like Italy or Greece now rather than the US or Germany, was he right or was that an exaggeration?
So there's been lots of comparison that the UK doesn't look like the strong G7 economy it used to look like. Some people have gone and say it looks like a developing country. Yields are volatile, the currency is volatile, we get reprimanded by the IMF, we get downgraded by a rating agency, we see U-turns, we see emergency interventions by a central bank. So the last few weeks have been very unusual for a G7 economy, let alone a strong G7 economy.
We've been talking about who's in charge, whether it's the Prime Minister Liz Truss or, in fact, the newly appointed Chancellor Jeremy Hunt. But, in fact, is it the markets who are in charge, Mohammed?
No, I think the policymakers are in charge. The markets respond to what the policymakers do. What the policymakers ignited is the return of what's known as the bond vigilantes, the ones who say enough on debt. There is a bill to pay. That's what the policymakers have done. But ultimately, it is the policymakers that are in charge. And you can see this from the effective interventions of the Bank of England.
Mohammed El-Erian, thank you very much for joining us. Steve, it's going to be a whole lot worse directly, according to him, because of the policies undertaken by Liz Truss and Kwasi Kwarteng.
Most of which have been reversed, thankfully. But there's scar tissue damage to that, right? And that's what now overhangs. And you can't get away from that. You know, it is why we said during the summer, why Rishi Sunak, let's mention him by name, why he said, don't do this, don't do a mini budget without publishing OBR forecasts. You know, if I think back to the Osborne-Cameron days when I was first elected, the mission of that coalition government was to rescue the public finances. And it was a constant job of reassurance from the Osborne Treasury. That's why he created the OBR. It was a constant job of reassurance to the markets. So the idea that markets are suddenly a new factor in British politics is not true. They've always been there, and they certainly were during that coalition government period. It was a reassurance of the markets because we didn't have that OBR forecast. That has spooked so much.
Right. Are you going to apologise to your constituents for the damage that has been done, the self-inflicted damage?
Well, the Prime Minister has apologised, and that's the right thing to do. You know, I made it very clear to my constituents what I thought of the mini-budget.
But why should she be given a second chance?
Well, everybody deserves a chance to atone for their mistakes. And, you know, let's see how she does that. I think she's made a good start in appointing Jeremy, who is certainly, I think I said this on Friday, I think he is very much the chief executive now of this government. And I'm very happy with him being so.
Camilla?
I'm not sure Tory members will be as happy as he was rejected by them when he ran against Boris Johnson. And indeed, I mean, I know that you're a close ally, but it needs to be reminded that Jeremy Hunt couldn't make it through into the second round of the leadership ballot. He didn't have the support of MPs. He now does because he's been parachuted in this emergency. But it must be depressing, Steve, to have your party at sixes and sevens like this.
Deeply.
You know, the briefings that are coming into even friendlies like the Telegraph and the Mail, total calamity at the heart of the political scene, talk in the tea room of coronations, you know, the pushing forward of Rishi Sunak, the pushing forward of Penny Mordaunt. Your party's basically become ungovernable. Whoever's at the helm, whether it's your friend Hunt or anybody else, this is an impossible situation moving forward, isn't it?
I am an optimist by nature. Some of my colleagues will be laughing at the screen, but I don't think anything's ever impossible. There is a very, very small, narrow runway whereby, you know, this can land safely, but I think Jeremy is a key part of that. I mean, look, I obviously wanted him to be Prime Minister when he stood against Boris. I don't think I've been proved wrong by events on that, do you? And I think he is a
well, he
serious
probably wouldn't have
figure.
won the mandate that Boris Johnson won. But also, I mean, Alex talking about his constituents, and that's fair enough, her constituents, and that's fair enough, voters in general. But what are actual Tories to make of all this? I mean, you should see the letters that are coming into the newspaper and indeed to my own email inbox. I mean, literally likening the party to sort of a bunch of school children.
Well, I can't
more difficult to herd than cats.
I can't tell you what Tories in other constituencies are saying. I can tell you what some of my members are saying. It's a mix of get behind the Prime Minister, we voted for her. Get rid of the Prime Minister, we didn't vote for her. They're like a lot of people in the country and in Parliament. There's a mix of that. But I mean, a lot of my members did not support Liz in the leadership campaign. A lot of them supported Rishi when he came to Winchester during the campaign. He went down brilliantly. And a lot.
But where's the collectivism? That's, I suppose, what a lot of people are thinking, Actually, when the chips are down, what you've got to do is kind of round in support. And instead, the Tories have this strange habit of tearing each other apart the whole time. I think that's what the public looks at and just thinks, sort it out.
I would have to say, given how brilliantly Tory members did in their last choice of Prime Minister, I could stand to hear quite a lot less from Tory members for the next few weeks and quite a lot more from the 99% of us who are not members of the Conservative Party and did not get a vote on this Prime Minister, did not give her a mandate. And even those who did give her a mandate, have not got what they voted for. And I think in that situation when nobody has elected what's currently on offer...
Did the Guardian complain when Gordon Brown took over from Tony Blair with no members involved whatsoever and actually no Labour MPs even casting a vote for it?
Parts of the Guardian did, I would have to say.
Right, OK. Is the policy now of Her Majesty's opposition that we should change the constitution of this country whereby, if you have a majority in the House of Commons and you can pass a budget and a Queen's speech in the House of Commons, then you can govern? Because that is our constitution. If you're saying that you want to change that, OK, let's debate this. That is the situation.
I'm sure Alex will.
But she can't pass a budget, Steve. That's why they've had to do so many U-turns. She's appointed a new Chancellor 4 weeks after appointing her first.
But that's literally the point. Because we made it clear that budget wouldn't be passing, she's had to change it. And that is governing in our system, is that you then govern by the reality of the House of Commons.
Well, except not all your colleagues are happy, even with the about turn by Jeremy Hunt.
This is true.
Let's have a listen to what Edward Lee said yesterday in the Commons chamber.
What is our vision? Of course we accept the shortcomings. Of course we accept the shortcomings of the mini-budget. But does he accept we can't just slide into a sort of second-rate economy and go in the direction of France with a bloated public sector, the higher taxes for 70 years, gross inefficiencies. So by the time of the next election, can we as a Conservative Party promise to get taxation back, at least the level it was when we started this Parliament, and get corporation back to one of the most competitive in Europe? Otherwise, what is the point of the Conservative Party?
Well, indeed. Steve, what do you say to Edward Lee?
I spoke to Edward in the voting lobbies last night. You're right, he's not happy. But as I pointed out to him, and I'm sure he would mind me saying this, is that, that experiment of, let's slash taxes and that will just produce growth. Well, I think we just tried that in the last few weeks, haven't we? And it hasn't gone so well. So, I really don't think we need any lessons from there. In terms of the vision, where Edward and I 100% agree, is that, of course, we want to give people more of their own money because we believe that there's no such thing as government money. There's only such thing as the public's money, and we believe public spend their money better. But this was the whole argument of the leadership campaign in the summer, is that you have to meet the public where they are sometimes, and the public are not in that place where they want big tax cuts right now. I can't tell you the number of my constituents who came up to me and said, look, I would be getting a tax cut from the top rate of tax being cut. I don't want it, Steve.
Right.
And I agree with them.
Well, do you have sympathy with Edward Lee?
I have sympathy with the idea that, and I think William Hague has written it today, this idea that this ideology around low taxes, trying to promote more growth, trying to end the status quo, all of the economic conditions that have created this problem in the first place, aside from politics, this addiction to cheap debt, quantitative easing on steroids since 2008, measures that came in because of the financial crisis just being applied to the economy ad infinitum, and now created this situation where, nothing can change, and you've got two of the major parties advocating, well, you seem to be tax and save, you seem to be tax and spend, but for the taxpayer, it's just tax, tax, tax. I mean, it's all very well talking in these terms, and there might be some people who are on 150 grand a year who are saying, oh, don't give me any money off my energy bills and don't give me any of my money back. But at the same time, you've got people who are on, you know, living wages or indeed, by the way, running small businesses. What possible offering is it with the corporation tax reversal to businesses in this country who actually want to get ahead? They've barely survived COVID, and now you're basically taking another 6% off their project margins. So the Conservatives can't even be claiming now to be the party of business.
Right. I mean, Gaby, listening to that, I mean, it's interesting, isn't it, that everything that Truss stood for has gone. And now we have Steve Brine sitting here saying it was an experiment that didn't work. The budget wouldn't have got through.
As predicted.
But everything is now on the table in terms of what might have to go. I mean, the Chancellor hasn't ruled out getting rid of the triple lock on pensions. He didn't commit to increasing defence spending to 3%, as Liz Truss had promised. We still don't know about benefits, whether they'll be uprated in line with inflation. So is all this now vulnerable?
It really does sound like a back to the drawing board option. I mean, I think at the moment, in part, it's just a question of him not ruling anything out because he doesn't want to have to show his hand at this stage. I'm sure he's got more idea than he's currently suggesting of where those cuts will fall. But if it is a sort of a real step back and say, OK, there are no sacred cows here, and it may be that we're going to take some decisions that are very difficult for the Conservatives, he has said that it won't be austerity in the sort of Cameron-Osborne model. It won't be austerity where, you know, public spending does all the sort of heavy lifting, spending cuts do all the heavy lifting. He has indicated that he hasn't finished with tax rises. There may be more tax rises to come. I think that would probably be welcome as a means of, you know, of balancing these cuts if they have to be made. It would be better if the burden didn't all fall on public services. I do just wonder how that's going to go down with the rest of Cabinet, who have had a Chancellor dropped on them from the skies, who were not originally appointed to serve under this kind of leadership, and are going to be asked to take some incredibly difficult decisions. You know, and I would just wait and see what happens when rubber hits the road there.
Are there any sacred cows? I'll come to you in just a moment. Are there any sacred cows for you?
Well, I believe that benefits should be uprated in line with inflation because we promised that in the manifesto, and the Prime Minister had that point made to her by a number of people at the One Nation caucus last night.
Yeah.
If you want to govern according to the manifesto and the majority in the House of Commons, my point, that you were elected on, then you should stick to it. Right.
Triple lock, should that stay? That's the highest increase for pensions, inflation, earnings?
I think that is on the table. You know, Rishi made some pretty difficult decisions on the triple lock, and you know, we didn't promise in the manifesto that we would keep that.
Well, is that a sacred cow for you?
Let's be clear, though. What you are keeping is removing the cap on bankers' bonuses. That's your priority here. That's what is being kept in this budget U-turn. Of all the things that's being kept, that's what's your priority. But that's the priority.
They just put it on basic pay.
That's the priority. It's not working people. It's not people who are really struggling to pay their bills. They're having massive mental health impacts by all these U-turns, wondering what's going to happen next. Who's going to be the Chancellor by Halloween? Who's going to be delivering this new fiscal report?
Jeremy Hunt.
That's what people are worried about.
All right, well, let's talk about those cuts, though. Where would the axe fall, if I take it from the headline, in the Metro in terms of spending and public spending departments? Would you keep the triple lock?
We haven't even seen an OBR forecast, Joe. How can we possibly
you talk
write
about
a budget
priorities
line by line without an OBR forecast?
You can talk about priorities and choices, because the Guardian headline here, Ben Wallace, the Defence Secretary, is saying he's prepared to quit, or rather the Guardian saying he's prepared to quit if Prime Minister drops pledge on defence spending. Would you like to see it stay or go up to 3%?
Rachel was very clear this morning that there should be no cuts to police, nurses, teachers. We shouldn't be having this austerity measure that is a result of your government trashing the economy and having to put disastrous U-turns. We shouldn't even be in this position right now, Steve.
Police or nurses. So what about the rest of the NHS budget? What about the defence budget? What about the DWP budget?
Show us the figures.
What about the culture, media and sport budget?
We haven't had that transparency. Right. I cannot sit here as an opposition MP and write a budget line by line, especially 2 years out from an election. We need to see those figures. You haven't even seen an OBR forecast for this budget, which is why we're in this mess.
So on the 31st, you will. So presumably in the days after the 31st, Rachel will come forth with where she would
the Shadow Chancellor
balance the bucks.
You're in power and you need to show us these figures. We need that transparency to show some.
What we
need, Steve, is we need confidence, stability in the markets, which have been utterly trashed right now.
Agreed.
We need trust in the public to show that they can have faith that they're going to be able to pay their bills and their mortgage and their pensions aren't going to be tarnished and that Christmas isn't going to be utterly ruined, because that's what people around this country are currently worried about.
100%.
Yeah.
And that's why I said in the Commons yesterday that credibility and confidence is critical to the decision the bank will make a week or so after this financial statement on the 31st, which will have big impacts on my constituents for some time to come. That's why I wanted to ask the Chancellor about that yesterday. So we are in agreement on that.
We are, but it's a bit too little too late to say sorry when the damage has already been done.
Right. Well, I mean, Gaby has pointed to the fact that Jeremy Hunt himself may have some problems with what he's going to be proposing on Halloween. I mean, John Redwood, again, former Cabinet Minister, talked about us coming into the Liz Truss government at one point. The government rushed out tax rises without any forecast of their impact on growth, so not knowing the likely impact on overall revenue. The way to get the deficit down is to see off recession. Tax rises will slow the economy, cutting receipts from income tax and VAT. Do you agree?
Well, John, it's all very well for John to say that, but I don't remember he was talking when he was backing Liz during the campaign. Was he agreeing with us that there should be an OBR forecast before rushing to a mini budget? I don't remember that. You've got to balance the books. Jeremy is going to have to balance the books, and he was being brutally honest yesterday with the British public and with my constituents, and he was being honest with John as well.
There is an argument, Steve, isn't there, that actually some of the measures weren't that outrageous. The tax,
Labour agreed with most of them.
Labour first of all agreed with most of them. The top tax rate under Tony Blair's entire administration was 40, not 45p in the pound. We had Keir Starmer agreeing with the reversal of the NIC rise. It wasn't the measures themselves; it was the execution. But because of this and the secrecy,
when you do it, I mean, a tax cut
execution
is not a mad
means
thing
timing,
to do,
Gaby.
But it's a mad thing to do when at this particular stage.
People have all said the most lunatic part of it. The most lunatic part of it. Well, yeah, because they could have said, here are the cost of living measures. Here's the money that we're giving you towards your energy bills. That was completely kibosh. Nobody even noticed the government.
But was it a good idea to do tax cuts when inflation was running at 10% and when we were told interest?
They didn't need to do it all in one, like, tax cut bomb.
Exactly.
But from Alex's perspective, just out of interest then, if you're not going to cut spending, you're going to tax people even more. I'm just intrigued by what's Labour's approach to this. What's the solution?
We haven't seen the figures, Camilla, and we're not in government.
If you're not going to cut spending, is it more tax?
The problem we've got is that we haven't seen any of the forecasting. The market has been absolutely trashed now. How can we say what we would do if we haven't had that transparency and we haven't had those figures?
You've already been able to comment on which policies should be reversed and which shouldn't. So, of course, you've got an opinion of the direction of travel. It's just that, obviously, Steve and the Hunt contingency now of government are calling for not just higher taxes, but also higher taxing and saving. It strikes me that you're opposing that, so you're asking for higher taxes and spending. That therefore means, just literally on a very generalised term, let's just be generic about it, if you don't want to cut spending, are you going to be taxing people even more? Otherwise, where else is the money getting from?
We have been very, very clear in that what we don't want is working people paying for this crisis. We've been clear with the energy crisis.
Hang on, let her answer.
We've been calling for a windfall tax. We've called for that twice, and that's been absolutely trashed yet again now, 6 months, and with no way it's going to be guaranteed in 6 months' time.
We've already got a windfall tax that Rishi Sunak announced. How much more do you want to tax these companies? Yes, after you called for it. Yeah, well done. But, how much more do you want to tax these companies? And, do we ever actually ask questions how many of these companies are British-based and we could even get at from a tax regime anyway? It's a very easy thing to say, just chuck a windfall tax. But as the Chancellor said yesterday, we have to consider the certainty that they have around their investments decisions. And that's one of the big problems we've got at the moment, is a lack of certainty.
One of the things that we haven't talked about is the lens of redistribution. Just briefly, Steve, I mean, Liz Truss says she didn't want every decision to be taken through the lens of redistribution. Jeremy Hunt has talked an awful lot about having, he says, the poorest at the front of his mind when he does make decisions. So when it comes to the energy price guarantee, which is going to be reviewed from April, which was actually Labour's original policy, are we saying that people who are not the poorest but would struggle to pay £4,000 a year in energy bills are going to be hit?
Don't know, because I don't know what the Treasury review is going to say.
What would happen if that's the cliff edge in April?
His instincts, and certainly my instincts when I speak to him about this, will be to protect the poorest who need the help most with their energy bills. And so it seems perfectly logical to me. I mean, you know, when they announced the 2-year energy price guarantee, you know, bigger fool us to think that that was costed. But when he said yesterday, we've got to protect the British economy and the British taxpayer from just completely unregulated rises in energy costs, that seems perfectly logical what he's done. But, you know, the Treasury review will put the poorest at its heart. That's Jeremy's instincts, the One Nation Tory.
Let's have a look at the front pages. Daily Mail. Liz Truss in office, but not in power. And this was the front page of The Sun, referring to her sitting on the front bench while Jeremy Hunt gave his statement, the ghost Prime Minister. Now, there was a cabinet meeting this morning, chaired by Prime Minister Liz Truss, with the Chancellor no doubt sitting next to her. I spoke to Andrew Mitchell, former Cabinet Minister and supporter of Jeremy Hunt in the leadership contest, and I asked him who's in charge.
I think both the two of them are working together, and I want that to be a success. And for me, the best answer is that we make a success of this. Now, I agree that it hasn't started well. A lot of the initial decisions that were made have not stood. They've had to be reversed. Reality has met ideology, and reality has won. But if you ask me who is in charge, the answer is that there is, I think, a good chance that an excellent working relationship can be developed between Jeremy Hunt and Liz Truss, and that is my preferred option. Right.
Is she a prisoner of Jeremy Hunt as Chancellor?
No, they're working together. She asked him to take on this extremely challenging task, and he agreed. And the best option now is that should work. If it can't work, then other things will have to happen. Oh. But the best option is to make it work, and I'm going to do everything I can to support the two of them in making it a success.
OK, and if it is a success, she'll lead you into the next election?
If it's a success, yes.
Right. You're sure of that?
Am I sure that if the two of them working together is a success, that she will lead us into the next election? Yes, I am. All
right, well, let's look at some of the polling then for the person you think will take you into the next election. If it's a success, YouGov have a net rating for Liz Truss of -70. She's the most unpopular party leader they've ever recorded.
Well, polls go up and down. It's not so long ago that Keir Starmer was the most unpopular leader of the Labour Party for many years.
No, the polls haven't gone up and down. The polls have been consistent in giving the Labour Party under Keir Starmer anything between a 17 and a 33% lead. She has a net rating of -70, worse than Boris Johnson, worse than Jeremy Corbyn, worse than Theresa May. And you're sure she'll lead you into the next election if it's a success?
That's not what I said. What I said is if the two of them work together and are a success, and I'm going to do everything I can to try and make sure that that is the case, then I think she will lead us into the next election. If it's not a success, and if it doesn't work, then the Conservative Parliamentary Party will have to think again.
Jeremy Hunt mentioned that you gave him advice before he made the statement yesterday. What was that advice?
Well, I'm not going to expose the plumbing, but he's a close friend of mine, and I gave him my view on what to do with the markets over the weekend, as he told the House of Commons yesterday.
Right. Can you give us any idea what that might have been in order to calm the markets?
Well, I'm sure I was one of very many people who he spoke to, and the result of all the conversations he had was the decisions he took and announced yesterday, and they successfully calmed the markets. We saw the pound rise, we saw the level of expenditure that the government has to make to borrow go down, and those are very good things for our constituents.
So you have more influence over Jeremy Hunt than the Prime Minister?
No, come on, that's ridiculous. I'm one of many people to whom he talks, and I always offer up my advice without fear or favour, but the two of them are in harness, he and the Prime Minister, working together for the benefit of Britain, and I want that relationship to succeed if it possibly can.
So you're part of the Treasury orthodoxy that was dumped a few weeks ago, but now is back in fashion?
Well, I'm rather a respecter of Treasury orthodoxy and a great respecter of the senior mandarins who run the Treasury and who, I think, run the Treasury extremely well.
Well, that was Andrew Mitchell, Jeremy Hunt supporter. You were a Jeremy Hunt supporter. It's amazingly coincidental to have two of the 22 Tory MPs who backed Jeremy Hunt in the leadership contest all over the airwaves today. Before you agreed very kindly to come on, we had a Truss supporter who pulled out. Is there a coup going on by you and the other Hunt supporters?
No. It's very tempting to look at Jeremy and say, look what you could have won in 2019. I know Jeremy well. I've worked with him in some of the toughest jobs in government. I've seen him up close and personal under intense pressure. He is calm personified. That is why the relationships with the bank, with the OBR, with the IMF, and the conversations that I suspect he's been having in recent days since he was appointed have given them confidence. And that's what I want to see from Jeremy. So, the reason that we're out on the airwaves talking, to be fair, I'm often out on the airwaves, but the reason why I'm out on the airwaves supporting Jeremy is because I think he has the potential to be a fantastic Prime Minister, one day.
One day? Which particular day?
I think he did have the potential to be a good Prime Minister, which is why I tried to get him the top job. But the thing is, I think he has the potential to be a fantastic Chancellor, working alongside the Prime Minister. And at the One Nation group last night, there was a lot of goodwill in the room, because everybody, friend or foe, must surely, even Alex, you must want the Prime Minister to succeed, because this country needs her to succeed, because she is currently the Prime Minister.
I'll come back to you, Alex, to see if you do want to succeed. That sounded like a leadership bid.
Little bit.
On behalf of Jeremy Hunt.
It was a Freudian slip there, Steve, and fair play to you, because, you're having to deal with a broadcast round where, as Joe has said, Truss supporters have been running scared. It's tricky, isn't it? The frustrating thing about Liz Truss is actually behind the scenes, maybe you agree with this or not, Steve, she performs a lot better than she seems to in some of these set-piece events.
Well,
that's
Gaby...
not really helping, though, given how she performs in public. It is kind of unreassuring to have the country led by someone who looks like she's appearing in a hostage video every time she turns up in public. And it's also somewhat unclear to me. It's clear to me that Jeremy Hunt is in charge of economic policy now. Fine, that is in charge. Normally, overall? The First Lord of the Treasury is in charge, and that would be the Prime Minister. But we accept that he's that's him now. What I'm not yet clear as well. Suella Braverman, for example, seems to be adopting entirely her own agenda as Home Secretary, which is not clearly necessarily the Prime Minister's. She openly disagrees with Liz Truss about immigration. She openly disagrees about a number of issues. It's not clear to me that in any sense Liz Truss has command of this government, and that's a very unsettling thing to watch as voters.
At the One Nation group last night, she was asked about a lot of policy matters because she is the Prime Minister. And, there were people asking her about fracking, there were people asking about education issues, about health issues. That's perfectly logical. And actually, she was very good, and she did respond very well to those questions.
Right, but this is what's going to happen in Winchester, in your seat. Winchester voting intention, Liz Truss. So they're terrible. They are. That's exactly right. The Liberal Democrats, you're going to lose your job. Maybe with Jeremy Hunt, you won't, as Prime Minister.
If the election's 2 years' time, one thing I have learnt in politics is that I don't make predictions. I'm a great fan of crossing bridges when I come to them. Let's see what happens.
Do you think Jeremy Hunt could turn that round for you in Winchester?
What, as Chancellor of the Exchequer? Jeremy
as Prime Minister? Could he reduce that 52%?
Jeremy is not the Prime Minister. I think he said, didn't he, yesterday, that Mrs Hunt is not a fan of him becoming the Prime Minister nor the Hunt children. Yeah. He's not the Prime Minister, he's the Chancellor.
But he is in charge, isn't he?
The Chancellor oversees all domestic policy alongside the Prime Minister. That is perfectly logical. That happened under every Labour government, happened under the coalition government. There is nothing that is any great surprise there. He is going through every single area of public spending, as I would expect him to do.
Alex, one of the other suggestions, and there are many to choose from, is that Rishi Sunak is brought in. He was the most popular in the rounds amongst MPs. How would Labour deal with that?
I think what we are discussing right now is holding the entire British public in contempt. As Gaby said, 99% of them haven't had a say in who is the current Prime Minister. It's unacceptable. If we want real change, I want to see Keir Starmer as the next Prime Minister of this country. This country needs Keir Starmer to be the next Prime Minister of this country. We cannot impose yet another Prime Minister on the public that they haven't voted for. They have no mandate.
Having said that, the people in Winchester seem to think that they want Sir Ed Davey to be the next Prime Minister and not Keir Starmer.
Well, let's ask them.
Just imagine,
let's go to the polls and ask them.
We saw him in the Cabinet once before, didn't we? And,
imagine.
I mean, look, how many members of the public voted for Gordon Brown to be Prime Minister? He took some pretty big decisions then, didn't he?
That's historic in that sense. We're talking about the here and now. Gaby?
I do think, I mean, Alex sort of handled that question very well, but I do think there's a real difficulty for you, isn't there, in a government that's run essentially by Jeremy Hunt? You know, you have your great selling point is Keir Starmer is Mr Calm and Mr Stable and Mr Sensible, and that worked when you were up against a government that was just sort of one kind of rolling ball of chaos. But it's much harder up against someone like
you have
Jeremy
the embodiment
Hunt.
of sensible and calm in Jeremy.
Well, do you agree with that?
I would say
it's much trickier. You'd rather have Liz Truss there, certainly.
I'd rather have Keir Starmer there. I would rather have our plan for growth implemented. I would rather have a plan for working people. We have shown investment. We're not going to tax working people to the brink where they're unable to pay their bills and their mortgages and their pensions are suffering.
So then which spending would you cut?
We've been very...
We've done this discussion. I mean, just briefly, though, Camilla, I mean, the poll by James Johnson of Conservative Party members for the Telegraph, in fact, if there were a repeat contest today, members would vote for Rishi Sunak over Liz Truss by a margin of 60% to 40%. More than half of Tory members think the PM is doing a bad job. But still, 40% for Liz Truss.
Yes, but then perhaps they're being kind of loyal to their previous vote. But it also suggests that perhaps there is a degree of fickleness in the Tory membership, as there is in the Tory party, about different candidates and their policies.
God forbid.
Who would have thought it,
Let's
Jo?
have a listen to the Leader of the House yesterday, because she was answering the urgent question that was brought by the Labour Party on the economic crisis. They wanted to hear from Liz Truss. But Liz Truss, as Penny Mordaunt kept repeating in the chamber, was unavoidably detained. And then this was her response to one question from a Labour MP.
Well, the Prime Minister is not under a desk, as the Honourable Lady. I can assure the House that she is, with regret, she is not here for a very good reason.
Was that helpful, Steve?
She answered a question. There was a silly atmosphere in the Commons yesterday, which, I just pray that most members of the public weren't watching, because, as Alex and I have both said, what this is really about is our constituents worried about the mortgage rates, etc., etc. It's not unusual for a Prime Minister not to answer urgent questions in the House. In fact, I don't think I can remember a Prime Minister during my 12 and a half years in the House where they've come and answered UQs. It's usually another minister that does that. I don't know what she was detained with yesterday. I mean, there is a war in Europe, so I suppose that may have been possible. I don't know. I'm sure you journalists have got ways of finding out.
Oh, we have.
A meeting with Graham Reid is the story, but I mean, it may or may not have been helpful to the Prime Minister to answer that question straight, but it's jolly helpful to Penny Mordaunt, I felt. I mean, do you see any mileage at all in this great triumvirate we're told about, where perhaps you could end up with Rishi as Prime Minister, Jeremy as Chancellor and Penny Mordaunt as Foreign Secretary? That suit you?
I have no idea.
Yeah, but what do you think of it?
Well, look, I mean, clearly I backed Rishi to be Prime Minister, didn't I, during the summer?
And you wouldn't mind Jeremy as Chancellor, so
if there were a vacancy, he would be a strong contender and would garner a lot of support, I'm sure.
Right.
But there isn't a vacancy.
Penny Mordaunt did seem to be having a little too much fun, it seemed,
She's good at the
the
dispatch
expense
box,
of her boss.
Well, yeah, possibly. Cometh the hour, cometh the woman. I thought perhaps even if she hadn't answered the UQ, she should have been there throughout. That probably would have helped her, because she did look like she was running scared. And actually, Penny is a good performer. It does remind you of the power of speaking human. My point earlier about Liz Truss, privately she's a lot different, she's a lot looser, she's a lot more spontaneous, she's quite good at bants, never comes across on screen, whereas somebody like Mordaunt is quite an accomplished performer. And I think moving forward, if she is going to remain in post, she's going to have to work on that, because so far these kind of stock responses to interview questions and being really difficult to navigate
Camilla's
and
right,
kind of
Jo.
using a script.
The Prime Minister came and sat next to me in the tea room last Wednesday after Prime Minister's questions. She often comes in and has a cup of tea and just chats to colleagues. And, she's very different in that scenario. I think what this tells me, just very briefly, Jo, is I think that being... it's such a different job, being a cabinet minister or any minister to then stepping into the Prime Minister's job. It takes time to learn how to do that job. It's a massive step up, and she stepped into the most difficult circumstances, and she's made big mistakes, and she's to be fair to her, admitted them.
What next from Labour?
I think it comes to something when you have to have a cabinet minister at the dispatch box saying that the Prime Minister is not hiding under a desk. We've had a previous Prime Minister hide in a fridge. What this country needs is leadership. We need the Prime Minister out there showing stability, showing calm, showing actual clear ideas for the public for the way forward, because that's what our country's crying out for right now.
And tomorrow, of course, tune in to Politics Live at 11:15, because there'll be another big test for Liz Truss, because she's going to be at the dispatch box for Prime Minister's questions opposite the Labour leader, Keir Starmer. You say it's going to be a big test. It's going to be a huge test.
It's really make or break. I think if this one goes well, she's bought herself time. If this one goes badly, it's going to come very sticky very quickly.
Thank you to all of my guests for joining me today. Join me tomorrow at 11:15. Bye-bye.